Devastation rocks a small town in the heart of North Dakota.
A massive ball of smoke and flames. I have never seen anything like this ever.
Tragedy in Taiwan on an iconic bridge.
The cables began to snap. It was like fireworks going off.
In Kansas City, catastrophic collapse at a state-of-the-art stadium.
The bolts of the hangars breaking, fracturing, cascaded down.
And in Canada, a bridge crashes down onto a major highway.
People were very lucky that they weren't underneath the bridge, as it would have been catastrophic.
With big builds, even the smallest mistake can be a huge disaster. From miscalculations to misunderstandings, some with deadly consequences. These catastrophes are every engineer's worst nightmare. Some engineering errors lie undetected for years, a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Only when they fail do we realize that we were in danger all along. Like this remote railroad disaster in North Dakota, which rocked an entire community.
The force of the explosions, it was unbelievable.
The huge fireballs threatened a small town.
You could be a quarter-mile away and feel that heat coming off of it.
And revealed a potentially fatal flaw lurking in the nation's rail cars. North Dakota, a vast flat state that boasts some of the richest soil in the world.
You're fine.
Photographer and farmer Dawn Fort has been working the land around the town of Castleton for nearly 40 years.
Agriculture has always been the most important part of North Dakota. It keeps the businesses rolling. Agriculture has been king.
Around 90% of North Dakota is farmland. That's equivalent to 30 million football fields, or 4 times the size of Switzerland. It's one of the top grain producers in the country.
In 2000, grain was rivaled by newly discovered oil in the so-called Barken boom. Named after Henry Barken, on whose farm the first exploratory wells were drilled, the oil is extracted by a process known as hydraulic fracturing, or fracking.
The Bakken boom was huge. We had people coming in from all over the country. We had a housing shortage out west.
The high-quality crude became known as North Dakota sweet.
It is that pure that we were told that you could probably put it in your diesel pickups and be able to operate them on pure Bakken oil.
Oil production was soon second only to Texas. Thanks to years of grain transportation, the infrastructure was already in place to get the valuable cargo where it needed to go.
The railroad goes straight through the middle of town. All you saw was the oil tankers going past. The United States was built around train tracks when you think about it.
Key to a railway's success is the ability to carry massive loads long distances. The most vital component is the wheel set. Each set has 2 steel wheels connected by a solid steel axle. At each end, roller bearings hold the axle in place on the truck, allowing the wheels to rotate freely. But these trains carry massive loads, and the stresses on the axles and bearings are enormous. The forces might be huge, but the setup is simple. John Hale is a local rail expert.
The axle just carries the weight of the train. That's really all that holds that together. It's just gravity. And so all it's meant to do is lessen the friction as the train rolls down the track.
By 2013, North Dakota was rolling out millions of barrels of oil a week.
In 2009, there was something like 9,500 rail shipments of crude oil in the United States. And in 2013, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 400,000.
With both grain and oil now rumbling across the plains, up to 50 trains were passing through Castleton daily, some loaded with more than 13 million litres of crude. On December 30th, 2013, at 2:10 p.m., a grain train hauling 112 cars was heading west, more than 1.5 kilometers out of town, with the onboard camera recording.
A trackside engineer saw damage that suggested something was being dragged along the rails, and he immediately radioed the crew.
Without warning, the emergency brake on the grain train kicked in. Meanwhile, a 104-car train, loaded with bark and crude, was heading in the opposite direction.
The grain train crew sent an emergency warning, but the oil train's radio was on a different channel, and they heard nothing.
What neither crew knew was that 13 cars in the middle of the grain train had derailed, blocking the track ahead. By the time the oil train driver saw the wreck and hit the brake, it was too late. Both locomotives, a buffer car, and 20 tankers loaded with crude oil derailed. Volunteer firefighter Paul Fort was expecting the worst.
When you first hear a call like that, your heart drops just a little bit because it's like, oh, how bad is this? And then you start to just pick yourself up and say, I got a job to do and we need to go do it.
Paul's sister-in-law, local photographer Dawn, was heading into town at the time.
A few miles out, we saw the first explosion. And we drove to approximately 3/4 of a mile from the actual derailment, and I started taking photos.
What Dawn captured was the stuff of disaster movies.
Huge columns of smoke and flames and heat coming back at us. Big black smoke billowing out of it.
The derailed tankers had ruptured, and more than 1.5 million litres of crude were gushing onto the tracks. Paul and the team knew they had a major disaster on their hands.
You start seeing that much fire, it's how bad and how big is this going to get, and what are we going to do to control this?
More than 80 cars full of highly explosive crude were still attached to the train, just feet away from the inferno.
We had people looking at disconnecting the fuel, taking the train away.
One of our friends was with the train engineer, basically belly crawling up to the cars as far as they could so they can unhook, and then the other locomotive pulled them back out of the way to stop all of the chain explosions.
These heroic actions helped slow the spread, yet the wreckage still burned throughout the night. The only thing preventing human tragedy was the fact the accident occurred more than 1 kilometre outside town.
We were all so fortunate that the derailment happened where it did, in an empty field, versus the city of Castleton.
In the immediate aftermath, an investigation was launched to discover exactly what had gone wrong.
There's no doubt what caused the inferno. The force of the derailment ruptured the tankers, and once the oil caught fire, there was no stopping it.
But that didn't solve why the grain train derailed in the first place.
At first, investigators didn't know whether track or train was at fault. Then, in the devastation where the derailment began, they discovered a broken axle.
When you see the scale of the explosions, a broken axle doesn't sound like a big deal. But this one had an unusual hole in the middle. It was smaller than a golf ball, but it was the best clue that the investigators had.
Investigators traced the void back to 2002, 10 years earlier, and a defect from the original casting process. When made, it had been tested for flaws, but back then there was no requirement to look deep inside. And yet, further analysis revealed this small hole had triggered the entire catastrophe. With a solid axle, stress forces are distributed equally. But this central void, although small, had a jagged shape, which created uneven stresses, causing metal fatigue, until finally, a decade later, the axle failed.
This axle was a ticking bomb. It had been trundling across the rail networks for years, getting weaker with every stress and strain from heavy loads. It's just so lucky that when it finally failed, it was a mile outside Castleton.
In the wake of the disaster, there were multiple recommendations for safety improvements.
At the time of the accident, new axles were routinely being examined with ultrasound. But the rules were changed so that second-hand axles would have to be inspected too, which would have revealed a flaw like this.
And to prevent rupturing in the event of another derailment, tanker cars are being made more robust, with thermal protection and pressure relief valves.
Railcar design changed. They wanted railcars to be built thicker, and they wanted more safety parameters put on their valving, just making them safer to haul product.
With safer rail cars and more thorough inspections, disasters like this should be a thing of the past.
There's multiple things that were learned at this incident. Nobody got hurt. As firefighters, we can go out there and look at this and say, you know what, I think we can handle it. And that's why there's so much more training going on for incidents like this. And I think that's great.
It's definitely a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and one that I hope I never witness again.
As they battle with Mother Nature, engineers are constantly striving for ever more unique designs. Get it wrong, and innovation can lead to catastrophe. Like this disaster in Taiwan that ripped through the heart of a community.
The cables began to snap. It was like fireworks going off.
A state-of-the-art bridge destroyed in seconds.
This triggered a major rescue operation involving the Coast Guard and the military.
The tragedy revealed a hidden design flaw.
Hundreds of tons of steel and concrete came crashing down. The destruction was devastating.
The island of Taiwan, on the western edge of the Pacific Ocean, boasts Asia's top-performing economy and is one of the most technologically advanced places on Earth.
Taiwan is well known as the world's leader in computer chip technology, but it also has one of the world's largest fishing industries.
Nestling in the shadow of the central mountain range lies the port of Nanfangao, home to one of Taiwan's biggest fishing fleets. Chun Sen-chan is the executive secretary of the Fishermen Association.
是东部最大的渔港，也是全省3大渔港之一。我们本会的会员总共有16200多个会员。我们的渔船船只大概有800多艘的一个渔船的船只。
In 1996, construction began on this 140-meter harbour bridge to allow larger vessels in and out, as journalist Philippe Charlier explains.
The old bridge was too low, so only small boats could get in and out of the harbour. And the one that was built at Nanfangao Harbour was unique.
The new bridge would be the first bifurcated single-arch bridge in all of Asia, and only one of 2 in the world.
Bifurcated simply means split into 2 branches, much like a fork in the road. What made this bridge stand out is that the arch itself was split into 2, a bit like a wishbone, creating 2 legs on either end.
It was designed to be strong in terms of being able to withstand earthquakes and typhoons, but also to be aesthetically pleasing, because this is a very popular tourist area.
Professor Chung Chae-chu from the National Taiwan University is an expert in bridge and earthquake engineering.
Nanfangao Bridge is a beautiful and simple structure. A single span steel tied arch bridge because we don't want to have the current in the water to block the fishing boat passing through the harbor. Therefore, we use the two bifurcated legs. This is very important, especially for resisting the earthquake load or the wind load.
To keep the harbour entrance clear, this unique bridge supported the deck from the single arch above with 13 steel cables or hangers, anchored to bucket-shaped steel troughs between the roadways.
The bridge deck is supported by the cable, which transfers the bridge weight and the traffic load into the arch.
Completed in 1998, for the next 20 years, traffic flowed smoothly both under and over it. On Monday 30th of September 2019, Typhoon Mitag hit the coast of Taiwan with winds of up to 140 kilometers an hour.
There was a typhoon that swept past the northeast coast, and it created considerable sway on the bridge.
But Mother Nature wasn't done yet.
In the early hours of the morning, there was an earthquake of 3.8 magnitude.
By dawn, life was returning to normal, but all that changed at 9:30 a.m. $320 tons of bridge and a tanker truck fell suddenly and without warning around 18 meters into the water below.
That one truck set off a chain reaction, causing the bridge to go down in seconds.
There were 3 fishing boats moored under the bridge with crew aboard.
There was no warning and no chance to escape. A massive rescue operation was launched, led by the Taiwanese military.
It involved the Coast Guard, the National Airborne Service Corps, and Navy and Army divers.
With members of his fishing community in trouble, Executive Secretary Chun Sen-Chan went to work.
第二个，我们成立了一个有推广课，成立一个前进指挥所，整个地方上的一个重要的位置的一个，再来就是清查断桥之后，桥下有3艘渔船。
More than 200 people spent 3 days searching the wreckage. Incredibly, the driver of the tanker truck was rescued and, although injured, survived the disaster, along with 12 others. But not everyone was so lucky. Tragically, 6 people on board the boats died.
全部把它找到，虽然不幸的罹难，但是我们也非常尊重他的大体，把它做了很大的一个处理。
An investigation was launched to find out why the bridge had failed so catastrophically. Taiwan's leaders wanted answers, and no stone would be left unturned.
2 days after the collapse, Premier Su Zhen-Chang ordered an investigation and ordered inspections of all the bridges in Taiwan, which number over 20,000, to prevent this happening again.
The first question, had the typhoon or earthquake caused the collapse? Not so, says Professor Chung Che-Chu, who was on the team.
No. The bridge was standing there for almost 20 years. Then the bridge failed, so that means there's a system-level damage. So probably due to the environment effect, not due to the single event effect.
The bridge had withstood years of typhoons and quakes. The next suspect was less dramatic, the harbour's salty environment.
Investigators wondered whether the collapse could have been caused by the very thing the bridge was designed to cross, the sea.
If we look at this damage part, it's damage due to corrosion of the tendon. So with a salty environment, so tendon rupture may be the major issue.
Engineers discovered that water was leaking through the unique bridge into the steel pockets that anchored the tendons.
You can see the tendon needs to be anchored on the girder. So the engineer built a steel bucket in order to hold the tendon. But after many years, this steel bucket becomes a good place for the water to store up.
As salt water collected in the anchor points, the waterproof seals on the metal pockets gradually hardened and cracked, as did the tubes covering the steel cables. This allowed rainwater to leak into the anchoring mechanism, weakening the entire structure.
Further investigation revealed there were no drain holes.
The tendon is hanging there, and we don't see the drainage for the steel bucket. So that's become the worst design for this case.
The salty water was trapped and slowly corroded the steel tendons. As this investigation test shows, they simply didn't have the strength to hold on any longer.
Once the first cable gave way, the next, which was also badly corroded, failed, and so on in a domino effect along the bridge, which brought the whole structure down in seconds.
The investigation found other factors had contributed to the collapse, from construction techniques to routine maintenance regulations, which hadn't required examination of the anchor points inside the bridge deck. This meant the problem went undetected for nearly 20 years.
Inspections were carried out between 1998 and 2016. However, the anchor supports for the cable were concealed in the deck of the bridge. And unless you had special engineering training, you probably wouldn't know that you needed to look inside to check for corrosion.
After the collapse, all bridges with cable supports were checked, and from now on, bridges with a unique design, like the one at Nangal, will only be inspected by specially trained engineers.
The bridge in Nangal was crucial to the community, and just over a year after the collapse, construction began on its replacement.
The groundbreaking ceremony for the new bridge occurred on October 5, 2020, and it's due to be completed in August of 2022.
When finished, the new bridge will be a more conventional concrete structure with no arch.
This incident should have been prevented. We just need to remember this lesson and really do the examination to make sure the problem of the tendon corrosion can be prevented.
Hopefully, once again, Taiwan will be blazing a trail with cutting-edge and eye-catching engineering. In the mission to create ever more spectacular builds, engineers are constantly thinking outside the box. But occasionally, pushing boundaries can come with dramatic consequences. Like this stadium disaster in Missouri that literally brought the house down.
Tons of steel hit the floor in seconds.
A pioneering structure that did battle with Mother Nature.
A huge storm blew through, and that was when the roof collapsed. That was crazy.
And revealed a hidden design flaw.
The bolts of the hangers breaking, fracturing, cascaded down.
Kansas City, Missouri was founded in 1850, where the Kansas and Missouri rivers meet, and swiftly grew into a major commercial center. Elizabeth Rosen is a local preservationist.
Kansas City is the heart of America. It sounds really cliche, but it's a place that's easy to live, it's easy to love. There's a great community spirit here.
The city owes its success to the cattle industry.
Kansas City was historically known as a cow town. This is where the cattle came, and at the end of the cattle drives coming from Texas and the grazing lands.
In the 1920s, Kansas City stockyards were handling around 2.5 million head of cattle. That's enough to make more than 2 billion burgers.
By the 1970s, agriculture gave way to architecture, and Kansas City went from cowtown to city slicker with an ambitious building boom.
There was a desire to have buildings that were both unique and at the same time that were cost effective to both build and maintain and manage. And this resulted in some really unique designs.
One building stood out more than the rest. On the site of the former Kansas City stockyards, the 17,600-seat Keer Arena. Engineering project manager Greg Litterick explains.
Keer Arena is very iconic and well known for its exterior skeleton and really pushing some of the boundaries of design at the time that it was put up.
This revolutionary design, covering more than 12,000 square meters, gave fans what they'd always wanted, an uninterrupted view of the action.
The uniqueness about this structure, because of the exoskeleton, is that there's no columns right now in this space. If you look around, there's nothing to get in the way of people being able to see the events that's going on.
The space-age exoskeleton is aptly known as a space frame. When originally built, it looked a little different, but its purpose was the same, to support the roof from above. 3 giant steel space frames rise 24 meters up, then extend around 115 meters over the building, supporting 42 hangars connected to a lattice of joists and trusses, with high-density foam roof panels sitting above.
This system makes it so that the roof basically floats over the top of the bowl and is not reliant on the bowl for its support, nor is the bowl reliant on the support of the roof to hold itself up. They have hangers that come down and actually support the roof beams from above. And so now we don't have deep trusses inside the event center, and we don't have any columns.
The roof didn't just offer uninterrupted views. On top, it acted like a giant reservoir to catch rain from summer storms, releasing it slowly to avoid overloading the city's sewers.
The idea was that the roof would catch rain until it reached a depth of around 2 inches or 5 centimeters. Then the water would be slowly released through 8 intentionally undersized drains. Think of it like a large bath with 8 small plug holes.
The arena opened in 1974 and was a huge success. Groundbreaking at the time, it even won an award from the American Institute of Architects for its innovative design.
It was a really unique design. We talk about thinking outside the box, and this whole building is outside the box.
The Keer Arena was home to ice hockey, NBA basketball, even the King Elvis Presley played here, twice.
Pretty much anybody who grew up in Kansas City from the mid-1970s through the 1990s has a memory of Keer Arena, of a concert they saw, of a show they attended, and it means something to them.
Growing up in the area, I came to see several concerts. I came to see several rodeos. So this place personally holds a lot of very good memories for myself and my family.
On June 3, 1979, the arena was hosting the American Institute of Architects' annual convention. The following day, a storm rolled into Kansas City.
A big classic Kansas City spring storm blew through the area. There's a lot of heavy rain in a very short period of time. We sometimes get tornadoes. They can cause a lot of damage.
The storm intensified with torrential rain and gusting winds of around 110 kilometers an hour.
Around 6:30 in the evening, one person in the arena started to hear strange noises. As he got closer into this space, he started to hear what he called explosions and ran out.
This was no explosion. At 6:45 p.m., as the employee fled from the arena, a 60-meter section of the roof dramatically collapsed. Tons of twisted steel and roofing fell more than 20 meters to the arena floor below.
The amount of steel and the amount of water. It was this center section, approximately 1 acre of the roof came down.
The collapsed section was so big and the roof came down with such force that the air pressure blew some of the walls apart.
Fortunately, the arena wasn't in use at the time. If the collapse had happened just 24 hours earlier, ironically, thousands of architects would have been inside.
That was crazy. The timing, the coincidence was incredible.
Luckily, no one was hurt in the disaster. But when the dust settled, big questions were being asked. In a building designed to withstand Kansas City's stormy weather, how had this disaster happened?
It had survived much bigger storms. So the obvious question was, why on this particular night did it fail so catastrophically?
Professor of Engineering Norb Delat explains.
One thing you might wonder is, if the roof is designed to hold water, why didn't it hold the water? That's what it's made for.
Some experts initially believed the answer could lie in a phenomenon known as ponding.
The problem is, if the roof is too flexible, what happens is that as it sags, it collects more water. That causes additional sag, it collects more water, and then at some point there's so much load on it that it collapses.
Water wasn't the only problem. In Kansas City's stormy weather, the design may have underestimated the effect of the wind.
In a windstorm, which is what we had at Keer Arena, is the water's getting pushed around all over the place, and it may find a low spot and it may find a weak spot.
The problem was storm winds were swirling the water around, and instead of draining, it started to pond unevenly around the roof, causing localized stress.
The roof weighed about 1,200 tons, and at the time of collapse is holding about 1,200 tons of water.
Further investigation found that it wasn't just the weather that was responsible for the collapse.
The heavy rain and swirling winds caused the roof to swing back and forth, highlighting a structural flaw within the hangars that had been there for 5 years. The type of bolts.
These were high-strength bolts. And when you use a high-strength material, typically you sacrifice something to get high strength. And what you sacrifice is the ductility, the ability to stretch, the ability to absorb energy.
Each of the 42 hangars was held in place by 4 high-strength bolts, designed to work on rigid structures. But every time the roof moved, the lack of flexibility in the bolts caused the metal to weaken, until it's estimated they lost almost 2/3 of their strength.
What happened was, over the time, as the water moved around, as the wind moved the water, those bolts went through cycles of fatigue, and so they were slowly stretched and unstretched, slowly stretched and unstretched. And what happened because of this type of steel is eventually it weakens the structure and can break. But it was just the phenomenon of that slow stress repeated several thousand times that broke the bolts.
The failure of just one bolt weakened the hanger, causing the other 3 to fail. This in turn overloaded the adjacent hangars, creating a domino effect, until the whole 60-meter section of the roof came crashing down.
As one broke, the next one would get overloaded and then continue to break. Sounds like an explosion, but it's really pieces of steel breaking apart.
It turned out that the bolts, although strong, simply weren't flexible enough to take the strain any longer.
Failures generally occur because you have a set of circumstances plus a trigger. The circumstances in this case were the bolts that had been weakened by fatigue over many, many years, and the trigger in this case was a particular overload of rain on this particular day.
The Keer Arena was rebuilt and reopened on February the 20th, 1980, this time with more flexible bolts, a pitched roof, and instead of 8 drains, there were now 22.
They've changed the profile of the roof so that it doesn't store as much water anymore. It effectively is now pushing all of the water off of the roof and down into the drainage system.
In 1994, the stadium grew, with more seating and an enlarged roof truss over a new glass atrium.
As part of that, they also expanded that central truss. Now the central truss steps back a little bit. It's a little bit larger and a little bit taller as it goes over the top.
In 2017, the stadium was transformed yet again with a $42 million makeover, this time into a sports facility for the whole community. Greg Litterick was project manager.
Personally, I was very excited to be part of this project to bring this arena that had been such a prominent role in my life growing up to now being able to revitalize the arena and make it again a place for the community to gather. I am very proud that this arena is still here and that we've given it a new lease on its life.
It's an iconic part of the community, and it's really embedded in the community's soul.
The arena came back better and crucially stronger than ever. Once again, rock legends could raise the roof without bringing it down.
And maybe this time, proud Kansas Cityans can create a few stars of their own in this very special part of town. With every project, engineers have to strike a compromise between safety and strength. If the balance is off, the consequences can be dramatic. Like this sudden collapse in Ontario, a renovation project gone badly wrong.
This was a major freeway and it was still open.
Miscalculations brought a bridge crashing to earth.
People were very lucky that they weren't underneath the bridge, as it would have been catastrophic.
Sudbury, Ontario, sits on the edge of a giant hole in the earth. Its origins are literally out of this world. Julie Moskalik, director at the Dynamic Earth Science Center, explains.
About 1.85 billion years ago, there was a meteor that struck this region. So we are standing in the world's second largest and second oldest meteor impact structure.
The impact forced precious metals from deep in the Earth's crust up into the crater rim.
So we're on the south rim of a basin that is about 80 kilometers by 30 kilometers. And all along the rim of the basin are these very rich nickel-copper mines. For nickel, it is one of the richest areas in the world.
Nickel is hugely important to the modern world, and it's used in everything from cell phones to armor plating. But it's best known for making money.
In the 1960s, Sudbury's epic nickel mining industry was celebrated on a massive scale.
This is probably the most iconic structure that you'll find in Sudbury, the very famous Big Nickel, made of almost pure nickel and symbolic of the famous nickel mining history that you find in Sudbury. I bet you that the majority of the Canadian nickels that you hold in your hand, that metal, came from this region.
This is the world's largest coin, and from day one became a draw for locals and travellers on the nearby Trans-Canada Highway. Most of them arriving via the Big Nickel Mine Road Bridge, a single-span concrete beam design.
A beam bridge is basically what it sounds like, as simple as a fallen tree crossing a stream. In the modern world, it's normally a concrete girder resting on two supports or abutments. It's one of the most basic types of bridge.
The bridge was constructed at the same time as the giant coin. But after decades of wear and tear, the aging concrete was in need of some TLC. In March 2006, the bridge to the Big Nickel was closed for renovations.
The main structure itself was in decent condition, but the ends of the deck and the abutments needed repair. It was also a bit low for modern traffic, so this was an opportunity to not only renovate the bridge, but raise it too.
The plan was to lift the bridge vertically clear of the work site, Steel girders bolted to the abutments would support it while the sides were raised and the bridge ends repaired. The bridge would then be lowered back into its new elevated position.
Using temporary structures to support a bridge is common practice. Because they'll be removed once the bridge is complete, they're known as false works.
False works might be temporary, but they're vitally important. Professor of Engineering Lydell Weeb explains.
You're repairing a bridge and you're starting to change the way that the forces flow through that bridge. You're relying on the false work to carry the load while you're doing those repairs. And so it's critical then that the false work is able to carry the load.
But like every project, engineers had to balance strength with safety.
There's a saying that an engineer is someone who can do for $1 what any fool could do for $3. You're repairing a bridge, so you're always trying to balance something that is strong enough that it's not going to collapse, but not so over-designed that you're wasting materials.
The road below Municipal Road 55 is a key artery in and out of Sudbury, so the plan was to renovate the bridge without closing the freeway.
The renovation would take time, but closing the freeway would be massively disruptive, so doing it all in situ was the best solution.
Repairs went ahead and traffic continued to flow freely. On the morning of May the 7th, 2004, Sudbury resident Grant Garber was working nearby.
Well, that day, and I happened to hear a noise come from the bridge. I happened to glance over, and the southern end of the bridge collapsed.
The Big Nickel Bridge was down.
Vehicles that were about to go underneath the bridge were stepping on their brakes, avoiding debris. There's ambulance, fire trucks, police cars show up at the scene there. It was chaos.
Imagine driving down a freeway and the bridge in front suddenly collapsing. It must have been terrifying for motorists.
So you don't see that every day. You don't see something that's supposed to be structurally sound while under construction. You don't see it just collapse out of the blue like that.
Despite the freeway being open to traffic, incredibly nobody was hurt or killed.
If it would have happened an hour earlier, there would have been school buses going through with children in there, people going back and forth to work. People were very lucky that they weren't underneath the bridge at the moment of collapse, because it would have been catastrophic.
The disaster severed a busy road, and people demanded answers. The first suspect was the very thing that made Sudbury great: mining.
Tens of thousands of tons of nickel slag were being shifted at a nearby mine, and some said the rock movement could be to blame.
But inspection of the wreckage seemed to tell a different story. Engineers found that the false work had been subjected to forces beyond its load-bearing capacity.
An official report listed multiple problems in the support structure, from the layout to the materials, and although it stood firm for 16 days, ultimately the false work wasn't strong enough to do its job.
The false work can't fail underneath a bridge, especially if it's over top of an operating roadway. If the false work isn't able to do that job, then if the bridge isn't able to either, there's nothing that can carry the loads.
According to the report, factors contributing to the weakness included key bracing that had been made from wood, not steel, welds being used in place of bolts, and multiple changes in procedure.
If you're building any load-bearing structure, temporary or not, sticking to the design specification is crucial. A small deviation can be the difference between success and failure.
Following the accident, the bridge had to be completely rebuilt. But more than 15 years later, traffic continues to flow safely, while tourists still flock to Sudbury's big money monument, the Big Nickel.
This collapse just shows no matter how simple a job may seem, there are always lots of pitfalls along the way, and any change in the plan could be catastrophic.
I just hope to God never see that again in my life. I remember it was like it was yesterday.